Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for all gathering for the official launch of 1466, which has returned back to us after quite an extensive overhaul. We're delighted to have our pioneering engine back with us. We're now going through to chat to some of the people who were quite key in the acquisition of the engine right from the start. Our Chief Executive, who's going to do a bit of an introduction to some speakers, and tell you a little bit about the history of where we were then and how we've got to where we are now. So I'm going to hand over to Clive Hetherington, who's our Chief Executive, and he will take us forward. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I'd like to know this will be very short. Welcome to sunny Didcot. It's not always like this, I can promise you that. But anyway, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to return the steam engine 1466 after an incredible 6.5-year restoration project. When 1466 was first purchased in 1963 for £750, few could have imagined that its restoration would one day cost nearly £1,000 that amount. My own first encounter with this wonderful engine was at the Forest of Dean 5 years ago, and I just like to say confident that it's here today thanks in no small part to the determination and perseverance of Phil Morrell, who is speaking later today. As with all steam locomotives, the journey back to steam is never straightforward, but today we see the results of countless hours of dedication, skill and passion. On behalf of everyone here, I would like to thank all who were involved in bringing 1466 back to life. We are really truly grateful. I'd like to introduce David Lamar, who's a very important contributor to this story.
Thank you, Clive. My name is Dave Lamar. I am young and youthful and sprightly. I'm certainly not old enough to be involved in the purchase of locomotives. That's my father, so I am talking in his place. Hopefully this isn't too boring a history lesson. If I see you getting fidgety and wandering off and going to get a cup of coffee, I'll take the hint. What I'd like to do is just take you through a little bit of the history of how this locomotive was acquired and what it means to the society and the organisation that we see here. Now, I live in South Devon. It's a bank holiday weekend. We left very early this morning, mainly because I wanted to be absolutely certain we were here on time, and I'll explain why later on, but it was critical that we were here before this event took place. So, I'm afraid I'm reading, so please bear with me. I think you might know that the origins of the preservation of this locomotive and the formation of the Great Western Society, subsequently Didcot Railway Centre, lie in the desire in 1961 of Philip Schoolboys to build one of the GWR small 48 model craft locomotives, which is what this is, rather than see all of them scrapped as was planned at the time. One of that number, a gentleman named John Barlow, owned a typewriter. So he was deputised to write a letter to the Railway magazine stating their aim of raising enough money, £1,130 at that point was the price quoted by British Railways, to buy an example. This laudable ambition was then largely forgotten about until the letter was published later on in the year. Donations started to arrive, so more concrete action had to be taken, as they said. So, the succeeding 2 years, saw more monies donated and funds raised, albeit very slowly. The Railway Preservation, now Heritage Movement, in the UK, sorry, just the paper, was at that time in its infancy, with the standard gauge Bluebell Railway in East Sussex and several narrow gauge lines in Wales being the few successful examples of a myriad of proposed schemes. No how-to manual existed detailing the process of purchasing a full-size steam railway locomotive or raising the necessary funds, let alone the subsequent questions of operation, storage, maintenance, insurance, all those things if those efforts were successful. The name of the organisation changed subtly over this time from the initial 48XX Preservation Society, which is a very focused title, to the Great Western Preservation Society, which is the complete opposite, and which stated amongst its aims, I believe, restoration and purchase of the main line from Paddington, and gradually moved across to the simpler Great Western Society, which is what exists now. Fundraising was not helped by many so-called railway enthusiasts deriding the efforts of the GWS members' efforts. Slowly, however, the bank balance rose until by September 1963, £623 had been donated or promised by 90 members. A letter that was then circulated to those members stating that time was running short as remaining examples of the class were being consigned to scrapyards and there was a real danger of missing the boat. By October, £718 had been raised from 110 members. And at that point it was felt that a concrete approach could be made to British Railways to buy a locomotive. BR had stated that they were becoming heartily sick of the ever-increasing number of inquiries being made to purchase locos and stock, most of which they felt to be ill-considered, so time was of the essence in all sorts of different ways. Now it's time to get the Ian Allen Spotters books out. A number of the few remaining examples of the class had been considered for purchase, but often made their final journey to the scrapyard before they could be considered, or were disregarded due to poor condition and high mileages. Amongst these were 1470, 25 and 71, all of which went to scrap before action could be taken, plus 1442. Eventually, two locos became prime contenders, 1466 here, and 1450, which is also on the site today. And it was anticipated that they would become available at the right time. Both had benefited from recent heavy overhauls and were in good mechanical condition. Now that was important because at the time there was no thought of any of these locos having further overhauls later in their life. It was run them for as long as you can and then put them in the museum. So the better you could buy at the time, the longer usage you would get. 1450 had the advantage of what is called top feed. It was in as-built condition. Over there you'll see the top of the boiler is missing the funny little box that's on the top of it. But 1466 was known by its crews and workshop foremen as being what they used to call a good one. David Rouse, who was an ex-Newton Abbot fireman and key supporter of the GWS at this time, was of huge help in this regard, arranging for access to Swindon Works records and assisting in mechanical inspections. On this basis, a carefully considered offer of £750 was made for 1466, which was accepted. Where could the locomotive be stored was a question that had been answered by a member named Bob Saunders, who was the director of Staverton Contractors and who often offered use of that firm's rail-connected yard at Totnes in Devon. 1466 was duly delivered in steam early on the 18th of March 1964, somewhat earlier in the day than the local GWS representative, my father, had been advised to expect, and hence he wasn't present and got there an hour late. So that's why I wanted to be on time today. Mr. Saunders rapidly summoned the Totnes station master, who earlier in the day had made a panic phone call regarding the loco which had suddenly and unexpectedly been parked in one of the railway station platforms. And Mr. A. Christensen, the ex-loco superintendent, plus Harry Sanderson, the BR mechanical inspector for the Plymouth division, joined him for the official handover in front of various newspaper and TV reporters. We therefore have the Western Morning newspaper for thankfully only photograph of the actual handover, which has been reproduced in the pamphlet you might have seen today. The original schoolboys were able to steam the loco shortly afterwards, but only after one of their number had been dispatched into Totnes to buy a box of matches to light the fire. Before the end of the year, 1466 had been joined by another locomotive, 1363, which was in the works.
Come on.
And two carriages which are one in the carriage there, one are in the front of the engine room. After an abortive plan to join the formative Dark Valley Railway and their scheme to buy and operate a local branch line, all of these were moved in December 1967 to here, to what has become Didcot Railway Centre, and they've remained here ever since. So, on the face of it, the initial aim of the 4 Square Boys was achieved. An example of the 48 XX class locomotive was saved from the fate of being scrapped. But the process of so doing involved learning many lessons, developing contacts, establishing how things work within the huge and politically influenced bureaucracy of British Railways. Relationships were sought out and respect earned with various levels of British Railways management, including the then Chief Mechanical Engineer, Deputy General Manager, Deputy Chief Locomotive Inspector. These are all high-level positions, as well as the more local locomotive drivers and shedmasters. All of this ultimately facilitated obtaining the use of the present site at Didcot and the movement of Society's locos and stock tours. It's no coincidence that the handover of 1466 in March 1964 was made in front of a locomotive superintendent and a mechanical inspector. Both of those individuals recognised that this embryonic organisation warranted their help and respect.
How much paper have you got? Paper he's
I'm
got.
almost done. The ability to negotiate with those who are handling the sale of locomotives continued to be refined, avoiding a bullet-the-gun approach in favour of quiet tact and diplomacy. Such an approach led directly to the removal of BR's covenant, precluding the ability of the owner of the South Wales scrapyard to sell on to preservations over 200 steam locomotives, which we have purchased, and those locomotives have become the backbone of Britain's railway heritage movement today. Members of the society with deeper pockets learned that they could trust those managing this relatively young and small organisation, and soon started funding the purchase of other locomotives and carriages, all of which were put in the care of the society and where they've remained ever since. From a personal perspective, I was present on the day of the handover of 1466 in March 1964, wearing my natty blue romper suit with reins attached as a 2-year-old. I have a photograph to prove it. Not that I'm going to show you. I obviously have no memory of it. However, all of my formative memories are of 1466 and other locos at Totnes and latterly at Didcot in the 60s.
It's Danny Humphrey again,
I think it's important to remember that organisations such as the GWS are not just about the artefacts, but also the people whose lives have been structured and influenced, hopefully in a good way, by them. I love the fact that my memories of 1466, people like Dib and Frank, extend to very nearly my entire lifetime, and it's wonderful today to witness 1466 starting a fresh journey of her own.
Thank you.
Oh my god. I was not filming on that.